Hi everybody, welcome to this week's video where I'm going to give you a brief overview of the STAR interview technique, what types of interview questions that suit this interview technique and those that don't. I've been asked a lot about the STAR structure as student nurses and registered nurses are preparing for interviews that are becoming more competitive. You don't have to use the STAR interview technique, but it's one type of mnemonic that you can use. So I hope you find this video helpful, and if you do, don't forget to give it a thumbs up on YouTube. So what is the STAR interview method? This method uses an acronym to help you structure your answer to an interview question. S for situation, T for task, A for action and R for result. And it's especially helpful when you're asked for an example from your past clinical practice, so behavioural type questions. And I'll be going through this mnemonic in this video. So when is the STAR method useful? The STAR method is useful when you are recalling a past situation or scenario in an interview. So for example, during a value-based interview, you might be asked for an example where you provided quality care. Or the interviewer might say, talk me through a past example where you led a project or you learnt from a challenging situation. And I have a free video on my YouTube channel that goes through what a value-based interview is, with lots of tips on how to prepare for your interview if you're interested and you have got a value-based interview. So the STAR technique is useful when you're asked for a past example to assess your past behaviours. So you're reflecting on how you handled a past situation. It's also useful if you want to share a practical example to give more depth to an answer as well. It's important to note that the STAR method does not work for all different types of interview questions. So it's less useful when evaluating technical skills, for example, or if at the start of the interview you're asked, tell me about yourself, or why did you apply to this employer, or what is your leadership style? This is more specific questions. Or how would you plan to assure the quality of patient care across this service? This is more a technical based question. Also, the STAR technique doesn't fit with specific scenario based questions. For example, what would you do if this happened? So if you're given a specific scenario, such as how would you support a patient who is becoming agitated, or what would you do if two staff members were arguing in front of a patient, or you might be given a specific case study or specific scenario of a patient deteriorating. Here, the interviewer really wants you to focus on this scenario. These are technical based questions, and the interviewer is testing whether you've got the knowledge and ability to deal with this potential challenge, that you're professional, that you're a safe practitioner, that you use a systematic approach, and that your answer is underpinned by an evidence-based practice, so that you adhere to current national standards, policies or guidelines. It depends on the question you're being asked. So you need to answer that specific technical-based, scenario-based question rather than giving your own practical examples. So it's very important to prepare for different types of questions, to listen to the question and understand what the interviewer is asking, and never be afraid to ask if you're not quite sure. You don't want to go off on a tangent using the STAR method if it doesn't fit with that question. You know, you could use an A, B, C, D, E approach, for example, if it was a deteriorating patient. If it's a scenario where something's gone wrong in practice, or there's a challenge to deal with, you might want to use a nursing process where you're assessing the situation through observation, through talking to people. You plan what you're going to do, underpinned by an evidence-based. You implement those actions within a certain time frame. You describe how you would implement those actions, and then you evaluate for it. So that might be more helpful for a technical-based question. Another thing to note is that the STAR method might not suit an individual's interview style. So some interviewees come across like they're reading from a script and robotic in their answers, and they're trying to fit their practical example into the STAR method, and it doesn't work for them. Also, some applicants still give vague and generic answers, so you still need to be aiming to be succinct, concise, and avoid too much repetitiveness. But the STAR acronym can be a useful aid to prompt you when you're talking through an example from your past practice. It's not set in stone that with interviewers that we're looking for the STAR method, but what we are looking for is that you talk through how you influenced a situation. And the actions you did and the results of those actions. So it's helpful to sort of prompt those aspects. So it works for value-based interviews or if you're recalling a past example. But you might find that there's a different type of mnemonic that works for you. So don't use it if you feel it's restricting you. And as I said, keep your answers clear and concise and avoid broad, vague answers if you are using the STAR method. So I thought it would be helpful to go through each section of the STAR method. And if you're preparing some examples for interviews, some of these questions and areas will help you focus down so that you're not giving a vague answer when you're presenting a practical example for interview. So the first thing is under S situation, you're describing the situation or the scenario or the issue that needed addressing concisely to give context. So what was the situation or issue? And you need to give enough detail here for the interviewer to understand what was going on. So you don't want to be too vague and too broad. So also thinking about why was this issue important to you? That's helpful sometimes to focus you down, or what were the reasons for this issue? Again, being specific with those details. You should include what type of clinical setting. So was it hospital ward, a nursing home, or in somebody's home in the community? So, make sure you maintain confidentiality so you don't give too much detail, for example, the name of the ward, but you could say hospital ward as the setting. Who was involved and what was their involvement? So it might include a patient and you, it could include a group of patients or relatives, a medic, a student nurse or other nurses. And then what was your role in this situation? And the interviewers really want some overall context, but they'll be very interested in what your role was in this situation. So don't forget this bit. Sometimes interviewees describe so much about what the patient said and they forget to reflect on their role in this situation or to describe their specific role in this situation. So I hope some of those questions might link to your example, they might not, but it might be that just one of those questions is helpful to set the scene, so that you don't have to cover all of these questions. It very much depends on what example you're bringing, but I hope that helps a little bit. So now moving to T, task. What was the specific task you were undertaking or you were given to do? It depends on your example. Now some individuals prefer to present the task at the start when you're giving your example, that you talk through the task at the beginning and then give a bit more context about the situational context. And this prompt is a guide and it's very much making it work for you. And if you prefer to do that, that's absolutely fine. But I've given some questions here just to focus you down, and you don't have to use all these questions, but one of them might work for your example or one or two might. So what was the aim, the rationale or objective here? What were you measuring if it's an improvement project, for example? What were you trying to improve? What were you trying to achieve? What was the plan? So as I said, you might want to do this after you've given some context, or you might want to state the specific task you were undertaking right at the start of your example. Next is describing the specific actions you took when you're presenting your past example. And you can talk about the actions of others, you might mention them, what was happening, but the example that you're giving should demonstrate your skills and actions. And also when you're giving your example, talk through what national standards and policies, procedures you followed, you adhered to at the time. You should also give a rationale for those actions and be specific. So for example, if a patient was angry and shouting in a hospital ward, you can talk through how you asked the patient to calm down and to lower their voice. Now that's great, but also tell the interviewers how you did that. you might have talked calmly to them and you were non-confrontational verbally and with your body posture, and also talk through why you were like that at the time, and you did this because you didn't want to escalate the situation any further by arguing with the patient, and you also wanted to prevent other patients and relatives becoming upset by the shouting. So when you're talking through the actions from your example, it's important to do the how and why as well. The R, result part of the STAR method, is a very important part of your example, which is why interviewees like using STAR, because it prompts them to state the result. So what was the result, the outcome or impact of your actions? How did your actions impact or affect others? What did you accomplish in this situation? How did it benefit others? So as I said, you don't need to cover all these areas, but one of these questions might have relevance to your example. What difference did you make to others or the situation? So think about how you can demonstrate that impact through patient or staff experience. Did you improve the quality of care for a patient or improve a service? If so, talk about how you did that, or talk about what the result of that was. Do you have audit results? Patient feedback is wonderful to show a result. Did the patient verbally state that they felt better in this situation? Did they give you a thank you card? Or do you have group feedback from learners or results from a service evaluation? Again, it really depends on your example and the type of role that you're going for. You know, a student nurse might talk through example relating to patient feedback, whereas a senior nurse might need to give more of a comprehensive example relating to the results of a service evaluation or a quality improvement programme, sort of more specific results with some descriptive statistics for a quality improvement programme. What did you learn from this situation? I think it's always nice to have present your results or what you achieved, and then a bit of a reflection on what you learned from that situation as well at the end. You don't have to do that, but I think it's quite nice to do that. You learnt X from this situation. So I hope you found that overview useful, and do check out the other free videos on my YouTube channel. If any of you've got healthcare interviews coming up, I've got several videos that talk through an overview of key terms such as clinical governance, risk management, clinical audit, quality improvement and nurse education. I also have lots of free videos on my YouTube channel to help prepare for interview questions for a range of interviews. Also some videos on NHS leadership interview questions and clinical governance interview questions, but roles such as nurse educator, nurse researcher, specialist nurse, community nurse, mental health, school nurse, and there's lots more free videos on my YouTube channel, so do check them out if you've got an interview coming up, and I hope you find them helpful. And finally, if any of you've got interviews coming up, good luck. I wish you every success in your interviews and in your future career, and I hope you found this video helpful.